we now have this wonderful panel that will discuss what we spoke about in this morning, and where you already gave an accent to. This is not just a legal question of regulation or deregulation, but it's also a geopolitical question of a much larger scale. We'll now take a slightly different cut, because we want to understand how does AI and digital technology relate to quality jobs, and how can this be reconciled? And so it's not only going to be a legal discussion, we have also economic researchers here, we have representatives from employers here, because we need to understand how we can reconcile the two. What is the right legal framework that will foster innovation, that will foster quality jobs, and not destroy, actually, quality jobs and wages, and also the collective level of employment. So I'm going to echo a little bit what is actually the discussion in many corridors on the FT front pages, which is this discussion is taking place in front of a really struggling European economy, with Europe being under siege in an innovation race that's taking place worldwide. There is a productivity gap where European productivity is lagging behind, with about 1% over the last 5 years versus the US, with about over 6%, with a GDP gap of 70% to the US, all the Asian countries with much higher growth rates. So before this picture, we also have obviously calls for deregulation. We have a struggling labor market, with a lot of young people especially having difficulty getting into the labor market, with a skill gap, with a lot of pressure on employees. And the question arises, what is the incentive? What is the outlook that we can give employees? Are there going to be more quality jobs coming out of this digital technology, or is there simply only more pressure, as has already been hinted at by the speakers this morning? So we have the European Union that has tried to walk this tightrope, because everybody's now betting on digital technology being the solution to this problem of the productivity gap of quality jobs. But what we've seen is the Commission has tried to come forward with legislation that would be holding up European values, both in terms of fundamental rights, of labor rights, of digital rights, with the digital acquis, with the GDPR, with the IAC, Platform Work Directive, information transparency rights for works councils and workers. But there's a huge pushback, which we all know. And this is a very friendly room, so we all agree. But the reality, and we have a member of parliament here, Estelle Colemans, the political reality is that there's a call for destroying the EU, because we are trying to enforce the legislation that has been adopted. It's become a matter of national security strategy, what we're discussing in the GDPR. So I think we need to put this into perspective. And also, we want to delve a bit deeper into the questions that were raised this morning, which is about how much worker protection is needed. When does it become maybe a bottleneck for innovation? So we really need to understand, because this is being discussed as we speak in the Digital Omnibus. We heard a lot of calls for worker participation, because workers could actually contribute to good AI, to making companies more productive if they had a say. And also, of course, worker participation might be necessary to moderate some of the negative effects. So we want to talk about workers' participation. And also, we want to understand better what are the incentives? What are the workers meant to gain from all this? What is the real promise? And here we're talking about a bigger promise of shared prosperity, which is one of the pillars of our liberal society. It's not only self-governance, also in the workplace, it's also about shared prosperity. And we have not seen this happening. Now, we're talking about all this in the context of a new initiative the Commission has come out with, which is the Quality Jobs Roadmap, which is, as it looks, one of the few, if not the only, legislative proposal that might come from the Commission on this matter that will consider workers and their interests. And there's a lot at stake, as we have heard this morning. So I'm going to ask my panelists here what they will think about that. So we have Valerio Di Stefano. He was already introduced, but let me say a couple more words. He's not only the chair of innovation at the Oscar de Law School in Canada, he's also been actually extensively researching here in Europe. He was based here at the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium as a professor of labor law and at the ILO. As well as he's a general editor of one of the most important labor journals. Lucky we also have what's really kind of important to understand somebody from the European Parliament here, Estelle Keulemans. She's the rapporteur for social and labor policy for the S&D, and she's been a very key officer for the union here in Belgium, as well as also research, if I understand correctly, at ULB. Frederick, wonderful to have you here as well. He will be more giving an economic view, but also a union view, because he represents, he's an economist with the Swedish unions, so organizing white-collar workers, blue-collar workers. Sorry, then let me correct this, blue-collar workers, which is as important, so you can give us both perspectives, how the Swedish model might be relevant to this conundrum, because you're looking particularly at how this tech is influencing worker organization, unionization, and collective bargaining. Lucky, and not least important, we have also the employer perspective. We have Adelina Dabu, which comes from the Concordive Confederation of Employers, and she will give us a perspective across these issues from an employer's perspective, and Antonio Grasso, which works for the SME Alliance of Digital SMEs in Europe, which helps us to understand how digital SMEs are seeing the world and how co-innovation with employees can work and make to profit employees. So let us start off this wonderful round. I would ask each panelist to give a 4-minute and maybe slightly more introduction of the topic, in which give us your take on how AI and digital technology can become a vector for quality jobs. And if you please also consider the Commission proposal on the quality jobs roadmap. So you had the start, so I'll give you the last word on this. Let me start with the employers and let's move across. Antonio, you have a microphone here? You shift up? Yes. Yeah, it works.
All right, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this invitation. I'm delighted to be here because indeed I bring the perspective of European tech SMEs, so small and medium enterprises working and producing innovation made in Europe in the digital sector. And for us, innovation and quality jobs go hand in hand. There can be no real growth in the availability of quality jobs for the European workforce if we are not able, as European continent, to produce innovation that is made in Europe. And nowadays, innovation depends more and more on capacity to produce digital technologies, to own these digital technologies, to develop from scratch digital solutions that are based and that are hosted in Europe. So our companies, we represent more than 45,000 companies from across Europe in the digital sector, produce innovation that basically goes across the technological stack, from software to cybersecurity to AI to cloud innovation. And these are the technologies that Europe needs to ensure that shared perspectives that you were touching upon and economic growth that is needed in order to produce quality jobs. And you know, the perspective of European SMEs is key because they can be the enablers of European innovation, of the innovation made in Europe, and they can unlock the availability of quality jobs for Europeans that ensure workers' rights, that ensure worker perspectives taken into account, and that are not just jobs that are created by non-European hyperscalers that are nowadays actually colonizing the digital market in Europe, that are making the whole continent dependent on technologies that we cannot govern, and that are basically creating strategic dependencies for the continent, for crucial sectors, including the public administration, on technologies that can be switched off when the producers of these technologies do not like the regulation that they need to be subject to. So when it comes to the initiatives that the European Commission has been putting forward, and the latest, the Quality Jobs Roadmap, we are, of course, supportive of this type of initiatives. We are part, as European Digital SME Alliance, and our members at national level, we are part at the European level, our social dialogue efforts, together with some friends that I see in the room here from Uni Europa, social dialogue efforts in the telecom sector, and we believe these frameworks, dialogue between employers and employees' representatives is necessary in order to progress an agenda that promotes more and more quality jobs. Another point that the Quality Jobs Roadmap touch upon is the necessity to upgrade the skills for workers in the digital and green transition, and we have been pushing for this to happen also via a key aspect of the European social model, which is public and private cooperation. We need more and more public and private cooperation at all levels to advance skills, to upgrade the skills of the workers, for them to navigate and govern the digital and green transition, and not be basically governed by it. So the quality jobs and innovation that is made in Europe, for us, go very much hand in hand also with the topic of technological sovereignty in Europe. We need a continent that embraces and governs and leads on digital technologies, because this is the only way to create more innovation, to create more economic growth, and lead to more quality jobs in Europe.
Thank you, Antonio. Let me ask Adelina.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Good morning, everyone. I think it's a timely moment to discuss this issue. And Quality Jobs Roadmap and Quality Jobs Act actually does quite a good job into identifying all the challenges and all the issues we are facing in relation to how we should defend our European social model. Actually, it's a matter of safeguarding it. And I'm glad that Professor De Stefano has made a good introduction into the global context in which we are operating. So as long as we are valuing it, I think it's everyone's job right now to stick to it and defend it. For the employers, I think the central message is clear. It's the buzzword in town, as someone was saying earlier in the introductions. Quality jobs and competitiveness go hand in hand. My colleague is aligned as well. And I think Europe can only deliver on both if we build on what already works and not layering new burdens. The quality jobs roadmap is also clear on that. Yes, challenges exist: demographic pressure, skills shortages, rapid digitalization, and uneven uptake of the AI. It's not that it's present everywhere already. And the documents also highlights this. Employers feel this pressure every day when they are trying to find the right people, the right skills, also with raising labor costs and their pressure to actually restructure to stay competitive. And I think the Swedish model is a good example of restructuring done right. Also competitive in front of the world, because actually we are not playing on the world scale with our own rules, I'm afraid. So we need to be well aware that we are not sharing the same values, and also the introduction made it quite clear. So we have our own rules, our set of values, but on the global scale, we are competing with a different set of values. And I'm not gonna say that we have to give up on our own values. On the contrary, we need to safeguarding, but in a smart manner to be able to keep them going. And not see, you know, the scenario that we have been hearing in the past weeks with the US strategy. And of course, as you were mentioning, European productivity has been stagnant for years, and companies, especially SMEs, feel intense pressure of this competition. So what are the options then? I think one is to adjust on what's been done, I mean the technology that already exists, and the second one is to create something else, and also my colleague already mentioned, so we also have the option, but we need to have the space, and as long as we are spending an equal amount of time to comply with the regulatory burdens as we spend on research and innovation, I mean something must be wrong there. It needs to be reshaped. And I'm not calling here for slashing on what has been done already, but just be well aware of the implementation and let things settle a bit. And if we are to take action, just take it at the right level. And the European social model and the collective bargaining that has been mentioned already in the introduction is a strong tool for that. Fostering social dialogue could be practical, constructive, and future-oriented, based on every national social dialogue model at the right level. Of course, this is something that we are somewhat at European level pushing to other objectives, and I think bringing coherence across all the objectives should be key here, and I'm referring to the objective that we have to raise collective coverage, for instance, and bringing the AI and digitalization at large in collective bargaining. I think it's a good way to approach it, considering each particularities of firms, either small or big, each national particularities. In some countries you have stronger company level collective bargaining, in other countries you have sectoral collective bargaining level, so you need to just respect how the model works and stick with it. And just one point, that would work if we have the right skills, because also, as someone pointed, I think in one of the questions, to be able to engage in collective bargaining, you need to have the right skills as an employer, because sometimes the employer is itself an SME who need to understand the technologies, as trade unions, and as a worker to be able to make the best use of the technology and actually make it work for yourself and for eventually for the productivity. We don't think that these tools are like a magic solution. It's what we make of them as well.
We'll delve into that in a moment. Frederick, maybe it's good if you give us a union perspective on this.
Yeah, well, I'm going to do the union perspective and a union economist perspective on this, specifically a Swedish economist trade union perspective. So I'm really happy about Valerio's framing from the last session, because he brought up Albert Hirschman's exit voice framework. And I mean, I'm really happy that there is a quality jobs framework, because one thing that the neoliberal policy often stressed was the quantity of jobs. Now that we're switching to the issue on the quality of jobs, we've taken a huge leap forward. And what's also really interesting about that is that the fact that we're pushing quality jobs, a lot of that comes down to economics having changed a lot since the time when neoliberal policy was framed on the kind of economics that came out of the University of Chicago. Economics is not there today. It's Nobel week now in Stockholm. The Nobel laureates prizes are being handed out, and the prize for economics in the past few years have really shown that, you know, there was a Mogles Prize last year, which talks a lot about productivity and the fact that productivity gains do not automatically become broadly shared. You need institutions to do redistribution. On that, I want to pitch in something that Valerio said. He talked that voice is super important, but one thing that I'm missing here in the report, you talk about, you know, Europe should push towards full employment, but there's no tools in there to actually push full employment. That's demand side policy. That's the role of fiscal policy and of monetary policy. So in Sweden, we haven't had full employment since 1989. It's been a buyer's labor market for almost 40 years. And I'm sure many countries in Europe have the same experience. So if you want to build worker power, yes, you need to have strong voice institutions, but if you don't have a strong labor market, a threat of exit there, it'll be much harder to get these kind of things. Like the kind of behavior we're seeing from employers in applying these technologies, they wouldn't do that if there was a threat of losing a lot of workers because they have good outside options. Now, another thing I want to, rain on the parade here, but the productivity gap to the US is not necessarily so big. The 5 years that we've been losing to the US, a lot of US growth has been driven by household healthcare consumption. Now, if you consider the fact that life expectancy is decreasing in the US, avoidable deaths are going up, like all these kind of health metrics, if you do a quality adjustment of US GDP growth, actually they're growing about the same rate as France. So if you take away the fact that the US insurance agency is over-healing you, over-billing you to have unnecessary medical treatments that don't affect your health, then suddenly you don't have a very big productivity gap to Europe. So that means that we all have this problem, and they're not doing so well. Finally, I will get into next year, the Rehn-Meidner model, which is what we model our idea of how you handle quality jobs in a labor market in Sweden. But it essentially comes down to we have 3 conditions for unions being pro-technology and being pro-productivity, because we are some of the most technology-friendly unions in the world up in the Nordics. The 3 conditions are, the first one is, when you have productivity increases, a fair share should go to workers. And that's what bread and butter bargaining about wages and terms and conditions of employment turned out to be. We do that fairly well now. The other one is that when you have productivity increases, you will have technological unemployment. So workers need to have security in the labor market, not just in the job. But if we look at that today, becoming unemployed in Sweden is not so pleasant. The politicians want workers to find a new job quick, not necessarily give you the time to search and find jobs that pay equally, that are equally productive than in the job you lost. So what we have essentially is politicians pushing for a de-skilling of workers all the time by pushing them to get a job quickly. Third, and this is probably the most important one, the whole idea that workers should be friendly to technology is the fact that the new jobs that are resultant from creative destruction or from reshaping jobs or new technologies, is that the new jobs should be better than the old ones, or at least equally good. And that, of course, plays in part to the matching problem with workers, unemployment insurance becoming less generous and being harder to actually make these transitions in the labor market. But the other one comes down to, the workplace issue, co-determinations. Do workers in Sweden and Europe have a say in how this technology is implemented? And if employers don't listen to workers, is there any way to punish the employer for doing this? Like, you lose the trust of your workers. Is there any consequence to doing this? And I would say in workplaces in Sweden where there's little consequence of employers, becoming on bad terms with the union, that's the workplaces where we see employers surveilling their workers and doing all those things. But in the industries in Sweden where there's actually a threat of some kind of retaliation from losing the trust of the union, that's also where the technology is the most worker-friendly, but it's also the workplaces where Sweden is at the absolute forefront of technological development and where productivity is at its highest in the industry standards. So with that said, there's a lot to say on this. I'm sure we can follow up. But I've taken the macro to the very micro perspective. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to invite me for this very important debate. But first I will join what is already said. We are not against progress. We are not against innovation. And even if we would be against, no matter, because it will come. But what we want is that this progress has to be fair and to be sustainable, not only for companies, not only for consumer, but also for workers. And what is the situation at this moment about this? You maybe already know the report from the European Economic and Social Committee from last year, and maybe remember, in this committee there is as well representative from the workers, but also from the employers. And this report from 1 year ago first begin to tell us how important also will be the impact from this new technology for the worker, because as it mentioned at the beginning, the declaration of the social partner issued during the last G7 summit in Italy, the rapid advancement of artificial intelligence system, including generative AI, is undoubtedly, look at this, one of the most significant trends affecting the world of work and our society more broadly. And this is our responsibility also to have a better framework and to protect workers and during this change. So big impact, big challenges. And what is also the purpose of this opinion from the European and Economic Social Committee is also to have an evaluation of the existing legislation now at the European level. So it means the regulation for the protection of the data, GDPR. It means AI Act, and looking if there is there loop in the hole to protect workers. It also you intervened during a hearing at the Parliament, and this report is quite clear and crystal clear. There is now a need of a specific legislation to protect workers, or to anyway to have a framework on the workplace for the worker facing those changes. But the question is it realistic to think that we will have that kind of specific legislation at the European level? So first, maybe if we go back to the beginning of the legislation, and also we know that the Deregulation report is a little bit the red line for this for all the commitments of the European Commission at the moment, with also with the dogma. Sorry, but I will call it the dogma of the competitiveness. I talk about dogma. Why? Because you know there is different kind of competitiveness. We will saw it's at the level of innovation or at the level of the cost. If it's at the level of innovation, it's quite good. But what we see in reality, also from the initiative from the Commission, is another dogma. It's the dogma of simplification. And again, we are not again simplification. We are all again bureaucracy. It's very important also to have a simplification. But what we see really on the ground is that this simplification is more a question of deregulation at the moment. And we fear a little bit a kind of omnibus mandate. So it means all range of new regulation, omnibus regulation, urgent regulation, so no real also impact assessment, and coming to deregulate the social regulation at the moment, existing European legislation, so the social one, environmental one, ethic one, and so and so. So at the moment, what is expected also is an omnibus on digital. So when we evaluated also the situation of the worker on the workplace, and when some people said they are already protected by existing regulation, it means GDPR, it means AI Act, we have to fear also that those legislation will be deregulated. So first things. Second one, if we are looking to the mission letter of Roxana Minzatou, European Commissioner for Quality Job, and maybe mention at the beginning also, it was no a Commissioner for Quality Job, it was a Commissioner for People, Skills and Preparedness. We fight to have a Quality Job Commissioner and also to have the roadmap you mentioned, yes. Because if we didn't fight an S&D and other progressive group, it wouldn't exist even the roadmap. So the mission letter of Roxana mentioned just two initiatives, one on the right to disconnect and the other on the algorithmic management, but two initiatives. It's not mentioned a legislative initiative, but two initiatives. So now we have the roadmap, and what we see in this roadmap, you have mentioned about the algorithmic management, but it's quite obscure because the roadmap say the existing regulation has quite a good framework already to protect workers, and there is no intention to have a really new legislation. Even if we are expecting, I forget, end of this year, we are really expecting an act, Quality Job Act, because the roadmap is the first step, but we are expecting to have an act. What we see also on in the roadmap, it talks about psychosocial risk, by instance, what is very also important, also to protect workers during the transition, and we also want a just transition directive to protect workers facing climate transition, necessary reindustrialization of Europe, or digital transition. But at the moment, the roadmap is not really clear. So this is the position of the Commission. But what is our position in the Ample Committee? Since 1 year in our committee, we decided to have a whole range of initiative legislative report. Legislative, it means that we are asking and advocating strongly to have legislation. And what is the list of this legislative report existing since 1 year? First, the AI at the workplace. So we really advocating to have a directive on that side. Second one, just transition directive. Third one, psychosocial risk, but also keep on working on the right to disconnect directive. Maybe to mention, it's very important, next week in Strasbourg, in plenary, we will vote on the first legislative report, the one on the AI at the workplace. So it means that we already succeed to have this, a positive vote on this report in our committee. But in the plenary, you can imagine we fear a little bit the position of some group, and we fear more than all the position of EPP. And at the moment, it will be a split vote next week on one word, and very important word, it's legislative initiative. So we will fight for this, we will keep under the loop, and it's very important, and maybe next step, I could have the possibility to explain you what is in this report at the moment also. Thank you.
I hope we will have the time. I'll give this to Valeria. And that's why let me already ask Valeria, maybe you could expand a little bit on your point. So we've heard, in principle, even employers are open to see quality jobs initiatives go forward. They see a chance that this can be also a lever for growth. I have not heard a lot of dissent, but I think it's maybe because we have not really been tackling the actual issue at hand, which is there going to be a deregulation and opening of GDPR, AI Act, delay of key rules, or do we, as actually you've argued, do we need to strengthen them? And so I want to ask this question to you later as well, but ask Valeria right now. Can you expand a bit on the question? So do we have sufficient protection for workers as we stand? What do we need to look at enforcement? Do we need to strengthen implementation? Do we need to add legislation, as actually Estelle has been arguing? And what role, and maybe Frederic can come into this, can unions play in this standard setting? And that they're capable actually with their knowledge base and skills to do so. Please.
Thank you. Yes.
I think
it's open. Okay. Is it? Okay. Yeah. Yes, of course. This has been a wonderful discussion so far, and it's great to know that no one here is opposed to innovation. Actually, the moment in which someone invents a bot to replace me from going to faculty council, I will be the first adopter of that. Like, if you create that technology, I will be the first one using it. There's a lot of things that are good that can come out of technology and innovation. And what I believe, and this is to answer your question, is that at the moment, we are looking at a mismatch between the technologies, the firms, and the workforce. there is not enough dialogue that combines these things together. In many cases, employers buy or lease technologies they do not understand, they do not know how to actually deploy, because these technologies were not conceived with workers in mind. They were conceived with the idea that someone can automate workers out of the picture, which is not going to happen anytime soon. So what social dialogue and collective bargaining are for is actually to provide a way of merging together these perspectives. And most of the employers, the vast majority of employers, don't sit in dark rooms trying to plot how to waste the life of their employees. This is not what employers are there for. This is not what employers want. No one in their mind wants to do that. Most employers, the vast majority of employers, know that the success of the firms also depend from the quality of jobs, from the quality of life of their people. If your people are unhappy, your firm is not going to perform very well. And your society, Frederick was talking about the difference between the US. I mean, do we want a society in which there's a couple of people that have private space companies and 40 million people are on food stamps? Probably not. So we need to question what kind of economic model we want. And I don't see employers decide upon saying again, oh, we have to go there and we want to waste people's life. This is not what employers want. What I think is missing from the current legislative picture in the EU is exactly the kind of instruments that facilitate collective bargaining and social dialogue to foster innovation, to make sure that innovation serves firms and serves workers alike. Workers know how the jobs need to be done, how the activities and the workflows work. They are the ones that should have the first input on what kind of technologies are needed, because they know what can save their time, and they know very well what is wasting their time at work. So having this kind of, again, possibility for feedback is something that is missing from privacy law, because privacy law is not there for that. We cannot blame the GDPR for not doing things that it's not supposed to do. It's labor laws that facilitates this thing. This is why we need that initiative. And it's also, again, as I said, it's irrational to think that we can have a system that works for platform work and the rest of the labor market is left outside the picture. It doesn't make sense whatsoever. We need to have tailored instruments that are predictable and that employers can rely on to implement good technologies. This is not about protecting workers for the sake of protecting workers, which again, I think it's very important to protect workers, but it's also to foster an idea of productivity that is sustainable and works for everyone in society, not just for the few providers of some technologies that don't actually work. And that's definitely not, they are not the SMEs. We're talking about the giants, not the people that Mr. Grasso represents.
I think let me pass this question directly back to Estelle and also Frederick, because you said it's pivotal for actually a prosperity, shared prosperity, so technology innovation that benefits both the companies as well as the employees, that workers have a say, so that we have participation. But there was a big question here. So far, these digital technologies have not resulted in shared prosperity. They've not resulted in a lot of participation. They've not necessarily resulted in technology that is worker-friendly. And I think it's maybe naive, but let me ask my panelists to assume that AI will automatically be pro-worker AI. So that meaning AI that actually helps workers to work more productively, that will help create quality jobs. And then there was the other issue already mentioned. If this is about social dialogue, how do we strengthen the workers' voice in actually, and also the unions and shop stewards' voice in negotiating on this, if, like you say, employers have actually no clue what's in the black box? So is it a question of skills and capacity, but also of rights? And yes, we have in labor law, actually, in many countries, these rights of co-determination. We don't even need new rules. But so my question to Estelle, but also Frederick, is how do we do that? How do we get this social dialogue happening and negotiation happening?
So, thank you. First, that's why we need also legislative instrument, not because it's my job as a member of the parliament. It would be schizophrenic to say nothing else, but because it's first step, protect worker. This is the first step, and that's why we want initiative legislation, because the algorithmic management is also very dangerous. I know what was said about the fact that employers doesn't want they want to care about the workers, but what we see also in a lot of companies, I wouldn't say some name, but you have the algorithmic management that exists. It means that people can be on the work evaluated, controlled by AI. It's not acceptable, and also emotional evaluation, it's not acceptable. First, protect them. Second step is how could we second protection also is this just transition directive. What is this just the purpose of this just transition directive? It's we will also need, and it was mentioned, that workers facing this transition, digital transition, but also the climate one, or the necessary reindustrialization of Europe, they will need also to be protected, because it will be a need of reskilling, upskilling. Also, if they lose their job, a mechanism like to give them something to leave. So second level of the protection. And then what in every one of our legislative initiative, what we need also is to ensure the collective bargaining, because collective bargaining is very important at the first level to protect workers and to be sure that workers are working in very safe and healthy condition. And the other one, this is the collective bargaining is the only and very important instrument to have a better repartition of the wealth inside the company, at sector level, or at more higher level. And that's why it's very important. And how can we ensure that this? So first, in every one of the instruments to repeat, and to ensure that collective bargaining will be also at the heart of the implementation of the new innovation system first, and that the employer, the employees and their representatives are informed and consulted. But also, next step, it's I will talk about a very also important instrument that was under attack a few months ago. It's the minimum wage directive. In the minimum wage directive, there is also a goal of 80% of coverage of collective bargaining in every company. So it means not only about the minimum wage, but at every level and on every topic. And this directive is not confirmed by the European Court of Justice. We fear a little bit about this, and this is a very important instrument, because in this directive, there is about this purpose of 80% of coverage. There is also a question of action plan, and also a question also to have employers and workers representative and organization to be more empowered, and so this is also a very important instrument at this level.
So you brought up the minimum wage directive. So the past commission, we had a lot of beefs with them in the Swedish trade union movement. Our employers did too, and boiling it down to one thing, if I can have one complaint, is that when Brussels is trying to regulate the labor market, much of the focus has been on individual rights. There has not been enough focus on collective rights. And I will explain a little bit what I mean with this criticism and how we can think about it going ahead. Because one thing that I think at least the employers maybe, but collective bargaining coverage needs to improve, and union density, so union membership needs to grow if unions are to be able to shape this technological wave in any meaningful way. So, but we're also discussing here rule simplification or deregulation, and I want to bring up, like, when Swedish employers talk about what they like about the Swedish model to foreign media, what they bring up is that we love collective bargaining in Sweden because we can make sectoral adaptations. We can buy rule simplifications from the unions. we don't get everything we want, but we can at least have bargaining over the rules that regulate this piece of the labor market, whether it be the whole industry or at the firm level. It gives an immense amount of flexibility to the employer to make rules that are tailored to the workplaces that they are ruling over. So one thing that I want to bring up here in this setting is that, like, one way we can actually incentivize collective bargaining is to keep these rules that employers don't like, but provide an escape clause saying that this is the rule unless you make a better rule with the unions in your setting. Swedish labor law is full of extremely draconian laws. So, for example, night shifts are officially banned in Sweden. But you can replace that piece of regulation with a sectoral collective agreement with a designated union. So that is one way to incentivize the employers to actually engage. They can buy something here. And that is perhaps a start of a meaningful dialogue with the union. That means that you can actually start creating rules on your own here. Another thing I want to also bring up, because we talked about the Platform Directive and we talk about these things, these are not technologically neutral regulations. So when we talk about the co-determination in the Workplace Act in Sweden, the employer has an obligation to inform and negotiate any significant change that affects the workplace or the individual member. And that rule was written in the 1970s. And it applies to all technology or any decision in the workplace. You actually have to inform the workers and the representatives and the union. So maybe we should think more about these general terms, the long term, but also provide opportunity to actually have rulemaking that both workers and firms can adapt from.
That's a great keyword, because I want to switch to the employer view on this. What would make companies want to have workers participate and negotiate with unions and co-determine exactly that? And would you, and that's a more maybe direct question, would you prefer en bloc liberalization as is being discussed, the deregulation at European level, or would it not be maybe more suitable what actually the Swedish model is proposing, that actually the needs of SMEs, of large companies, of sectors, of regions are very different, and therefore would advocate for much more flexibility and directly negotiated with unions negotiated solutions?
Absolutely. That's why it's key that we have a simplified model and general model at EU level, and we already have plenty of that. And we are left with space to negotiate at national level, sectoral, company level. Because otherwise, everything is set in stone. There is hardly anything you can negotiate. You cannot adjust to new technologies because technologies are changing every month now. Therefore, I think this is something we could totally agree. And then you'll have more space for collective bargaining at all levels, each and everyone depending on their own national model. And then secondly, you'll also have the strong social partners that would be able to tackle with this. So capacity building of social partner is something very important as well, has been enforced at EU level, and I know each and every country has their own model dealing with this, because all the partners involved should be able to deal with these rather complex issues. This is something I think we have in common, and we should be in a position to deal with, because I don't agree that it's the regulation what is happening now, as long as we are not changing any rights. And the digital omnibus, it's actually something that shows that there is no interference with the right of workers or any other substantive matters. It's more of an issue of how we do things and why some things ended up there. And to be very honest, like politically, we all know that usually they are the result of the negotiation. So somehow we end up with things that are not necessarily practical at all times. And we can also agree that without influencing the substantive rights, we can live without them. And then again, also give more space for collective bargaining. I'll also quickly react on two things that the ESC, it happens to be a member of the ESC as well, and also the same opinion that actually has a counter opinion voted with plus 100 votes as well, also highlights that are already 116 pieces of relevant digital legislation supporting workers' rights in various aspects. So imagine 116 that an SME has to deal with as well. So we need to also put this into perspective and imagine that not all companies are large companies with a very large department of technology, another one on legal affairs, but there is something there for everyone. But we need to make this in a streamlined manner so that companies can work with them as well, and at the end also the workers, because they'll have to know all the pieces of legislation as well when they come to the negotiation table. Well, they should be able to have a clear understanding. So simplification itself will help everyone. And just one single point, that the results of the prosperity that haven't been shared. Unfortunately, I don't think we are in a position now to share. If you are looking at the statistics, the profits are actually going down. We see we are losing competitiveness, and also the adoption of AI and digital tools. It's very uneven across the EU. This is something we need to, so we've only started basically. I don't think we are, unfortunately, actually in a position to say that we've been taking advantage of these tools. It's just the very beginning of the process, and we need to step up to have some prosperity to share further on.
It doesn't sound like good news to me. I'm not sure that the wave that is coming is rolling in the direction of workers, if I understand correctly, right? Because you also don't see a prospect that sharing prosperity is possible under these circumstances. So, if
I don't think there is just to clarify, I don't think we have yet the something to share, because we haven't seen seen it coming just yet. It's very uneven adoption.
Let's ask Antonio what he thinks what is necessary then. What is the legal framework that is necessary so companies can innovate but also share the prosperity? Because this is what we're looking for, is this formula.
Yes, so I mean, from the perspective of SME, it is necessary to take into consideration the perspective of the workers, and I've already mentioned in my intervention before, social dialogue is the instrument to leverage this, especially from the SME perspective at all levels, European and national ones. And we do believe that it is important to take into account the workers' perspective, because we are the first ones that are lacking the workers that we need to embrace digital transformation, to lead the digital transformation, and to challenge the position of dominant players in the market that are actually often the ones that do not, that are not so keen on respecting worker rights. I mean, there are a few examples. Amazon does not have a very good relationship with trade unions. I'm afraid we have got several examples of that. Generative AI, that is this disruptive technology that is being oligopolized by non-European players, is being trained at the expense of worker rights across the globe. And we do not want this model of innovation. So you ask me, what type of framework do we need to boost innovation, or a European way of innovation? This is in the interest of European SMEs. We do believe that simplification can help, but we think it's not enough, because we need industrial policy. This is what we lack in Europe. We need public-private collaboration. We need mission-oriented innovation that can deliver on public missions that are in the interest of European ecosystem at large, including workers. On simplification, when it comes to the digital omnibus, we do not believe that workers' rights are being put at stake. We find, to some extent, that there needs to be clearly caution when it comes to opening up the GDPR. The vast majority of the innovative companies in Europe have already complied with the GDPR. So, but we do recognize that when it comes to competition issues, when it comes to getting access to data, the challenging the dominant position of the non-European markets implies that we provide access under, of course, certain criteria, certain protection to data also by SMEs. Otherwise, we are never going to challenge the position of dominant players in the market. And when I mention industrial policy, we believe that there needs to be public incentive, there needs to be a cohesive framework in Europe that can bring together different European innovators across different technological layers that can federate the ecosystem, that can scale up and challenge the dominant players. When we look at several technological markets, take the example of cloud, it is dominated by 75% by non-European players, the same non-European players that have a kind of allergy to comply with workers' protection and European laws. So to challenge that dominant position, we need to bring, for instance, together several cloud providers across markets with industrial policy, with, for instance, the next multi-annual financial framework, putting also money in the economy that can bring together the European industrial players and can develop this technology made in Europe. This is per se, if we take the lead from the industrial perspective in Europe on these technologies, it is per se a way to ensure that better quality job can be delivered in Europe, can remain in Europe, and that cannot be taken over and challenged by non-European players. Simplification is a step that can help, but it cannot be sufficient. And there I agree with some remarks that were made. We need to be sure that simplification does not equal full deregulation. We cannot take simplification as a package. We need to be very, precise. And for instance, we also acknowledge that there are some laws that have become part of the digital omnibus, such as the Data Act, that had the intention to open access to data to third parties, including SMEs, that are now ending up in the digital omnibus at the expense of these principles. It is only a favor to the big tech if we restrict access to industrial data for third parties, and they can maintain the oligopoly on this data. So simplification should not become a favor to Washington, especially in this geopolitical landscape, but it should be a way to make the life of European companies a little bit easier, to ensure that innovation can be fostered in Europe, to make room for them to invest into innovation rather than spending time and cost in bureaucratic issues, and to make sure that with innovation, quality jobs can be created and can stay in Europe.
I have to ask Valerie here in order to highlight a little bit. There's no obvious tension in these statements because it seems everybody's agreeing that we want a third way, a European innovation model that does respect the social rights, the labor rights. I didn't hear that you wanted to cut the protective rules for workers. I didn't hear that, but somehow we're still left with the question with which we started, is we are seeking a model in which we can see productivity gains, in which we can see growth, in order to have quality jobs that pay well, that also deliver the necessary tax revenues, that we can also maintain the welfare state. So this is what also Draghi and others said is not a conflict, but quality jobs and growth can go together. But it seems, and this seems to be the clue, and I will ask Valerio if this is correct, that social dialogue is at the heart of this. And social dialogue over actually things that we can govern, because the big issue that you and we have, both the workers and the companies have, is that actually we don't govern these platforms. So there's nothing to negotiate. It's not just out of a question of rights to negotiate. It's a question, is this controlled in Europe? Can this be controlled in Europe? Especially if we see the backlash to fines when we're actually trying to enforce rules on exactly these technologies, platforms, or companies. So the question is, how can we, and this is back to you, most difficult question probably, how can we now get this social dialogue enforced over something that we can govern, or at least what we're able to govern? And I don't need to remind people in the audience here, know that exactly the rules by design and default and impact assessments in the GDPR are the most disrespected. So this, my question to you.
Thank you. And I will start from a bit far, but I'll get there in my allotted minutes, I promise. I just
we
want
need to leave some time for the audience.
I just want to make a step back to 10 years ago, because I'm old enough to remember when the Barroso Commission decided that the way forward was deregulating labor markets and to strip away protection, something that has not resulted in better productivity, in more innovation. It has only resulted in the spurt of extremist parties everywhere in Europe, because people don't stopped perceiving the EU as something that is on their side, precisely from the moment in which they were told it is the EU that is asking us to deregulate labor markets, to make your protection less effective. Without, I mean, we still have to see any rise from productivity from those initiatives. And also, I'm still old enough to remember when 5 or 6 years ago, many people had in mind that everyone should become Uber, that every worker should become a platform worker. Where does it leave skills is yet to understand, because those jobs don't offer any training, don't offer any upskilling. They are really not good for actual innovation. So we really need to be careful around the buzzwords that get launched in Brussels from time to time. One thing that I fear is that precisely because at the moment our privacy instruments are horizontal, meaning they apply over the board. The GDPR applies to consumers, but also to workers, but also to many other things. It's not easy to say this is not going to be in the detriment of workplace regulation, because you cannot pose clear boundaries between, when you deregulate certain aspects, this is going to have a spillover effect on the aspects that you don't want to deregulate, and no one has an interest, as we have heard, in deregulating. To answer your specific question, I think that we have some instruments that would allow that, but they are unenforced at the moment, especially in our field, because those instruments were not conceived with workplaces in mind. This is why we need workplace-specific standards, and we need them at the European level, because we cannot fathom doing this in 27 different member states differently. European standards allow for flexibility. They don't impose a one unified single model of doing things. We have had information and consultation rights under EU instruments since I don't even remember how, and I'm a law professor. We can do this, and we cannot do this and demand this to member states to do this in 27 different ways, because when that happens, employers will really not know what to do in the single market. If we have a single market, we also need to have rules that are, if you want, more uniform in fostering the social dialogue that everyone in this panel has said can be useful. So that's why I believe we have to pursue that initiative at the moment, because at the moment the instruments we have, no matter what you hear in the Brussels corridors, they are not up to speed. They are not specific to what we need in the world of work.
Thank you. I take this chance to also involve our audience to our discussion. And I would be very happy to hear questions from unions, from workers, from companies, policymakers present. To the panelists. Let me start here on the left.
Hello, thank you to all the panelists. It's been a really, really interesting discussion. I wanted to bring up a kind of a specific question, I guess, which is to do with, how to set a standard that creates a workable framework to kind of have better regulation in this space. And sorry if it's not a very clear question, but it is to do with the fact that work also generates data. So I can understand this quite clearly in the context of the workers that we represent as an actors federation, because if you record somebody, you have a data set. And arguably the data that's in that data set is biometric data. It's voice, it's likeness, it's a recognizable person. And that is a new good coming out of that work that didn't exist previously. And I wonder whether, in general, that's more widely true of the workforce, and how owners can, or how workers can exert ownership in relation to that data. And is that part of something we should be discussing in the framework of platform work, algorithmic management, or collective bargaining for data in the workplace? I think employers have responsibilities in relation to data generated. So they need to agree a model for who owns that data and how it's used. And they have responsibilities because, again, in relation to the workplaces that I know, if employers hold data but they don't hold it securely, it can be scraped and it can be used, and it can be used in AI applications that go against the interests of the workers that produce that data in the first place. And again, some GDPR elements of protection are relevant in relation to private biometric data like voice likeness, etc. It is impossible to mobilize those protections in a meaningful way in that workplace relationship. It's extremely difficult, it's very cumbersome. It offers some elements, but they're not sufficient, and it looks likely that they would be weakened anyway in the context of the digital omnibus. So my question is how to capture that aspect in this discussion.
Thank you. There was another question. Shall we have that second question?
Thank you. Thanks very much for a very inspirational panel. My question has to do with the utility of European law, and what's interesting is that because I'm hearing coming from all of you, it's a complexity around this kind of question of uniformity versus diversity, and it's a dilemma that pervades a lot of the ways that these things can be operating. And I'm wondering, I think this would be a question that would probably be adapted for any of your perspectives, but is there a way? Okay. What is happening in terms of better worker representation from the work that any of you are doing, whereby these kind of questions where technology as a driver can be something understood as having worker voice as oriented, and the bigger questions, as I've said, are there, but and then the final thing, is there scope for thinking about co-determination, because that has come up, and I know that there are moves of thinking about this as something that could become increasingly part of national law in far more of the national kind of context, and is that something that could be scope to deal with those questions? Okay, that would be it.
Okay, I think before we, let's tackle one question after the other. I think your question was very much about key issues that we've been discussing, which is both, it's a question of data rights and the protection of workers and their data, so it's a privacy question, data protection question, but it was also in that question was, who shares the benefits? Because there's obviously, from this data extraction, there's value created. And workers, and this was unfortunately in this panel least discussed, we wanted to also discuss what are the incentives? How are employees or workers sharing in what's coming out of this, what is generated? Do they have any ownership? Do they have any IP rights? Do they have any incentives to join this huge wave of AI and deployment? So I think we have questions, I think, for Estelle maybe here, also Valeria maybe to answer this. And then your question, Phoebe, was about do we have uniform rules, or do we have rules that can be moderated on a national level? I think Frederick might be good to answer that, but we'll also try to bring you in if you want to comment on that. Estelle, do you want to start maybe to take the question about data, the rights to the data that is being generated?
So, yes, that's why we really fear also about a deregulation, but sorry, we can really talk about deregulation. Just look at Omnibus 1, we are really talking about deregulation, and what is the difference between simplification and deregulation is when you reach the core of the legislation, that's quite a deregulation. And second step, just look at the website of Business Europe, and you will see what will be the next step also in the regulation. But so the data are very important because, as you mentioned, this is a question of respect of the private life, but this is also a question of those data generate also wealth. That's why the most important, and this is what I was trying to mean, but sorry, I'm not fluent in English, as you can mention. I try to do my best, but that's why we need a regulation, and quite clear regulation or the directive, just to be sure that the role of the representative of the worker will be strong on the floor and on the level of the company. Just looking at what is in the report now voted next week in plenary, what are the points we are asking to protect worker in this report? First, transparency and information. Workers must be informed when and how their data and performance are analyzed by automated system. First point. Second, right to explanation and appeal, because that's what you mentioned also. Not every worker have the capacity to understand what's happening also with those innovation and new technology. Right to explanation and appeal. Legislation must guarantee employees the right to obtain a clear explanation of decisions made by automated system, as well as the ability to challenge those decisions before an independent body. Next point, privacy protection and limits on surveillance. Algorithmics must not be used for intrusive or constant monitoring of workers. That's more what we think about surveillance of the IA. So private regulation should protect the dignity and integrity of every employee. Then ethic and mandatory audits. Then voilà, I can put the whole range of what we need and what we put under the loop in this report. And that's why we really need that kind of legislation. Why? Because it's quite clear mentioned. Those points are very important points at every level, in every member state. And it's a question of dignity, it's a question of workers' rights, and it's a question of on health and safety at work. So this report puts really the collective bargaining, the information, the consultation at every step and every level in the company. Yeah.
So if the Parliament succeeds, what exactly, Valeria, should they put in this rules so they bite? We had the social dialogue needs to work, and you said we need to put in, we need to kind of connect better labor rights with data protection rights. But here, this was especially about the shared prosperity, and I heard you also in your keynote say that. So how do we make sure that actually workers share in this prosperity? How can they benefit?
So I think we cannot put that part in this initiative, which is already difficult enough to bring forward. But this is definitely a conversation that we need having. At the moment, data generate a lot of wealth, and that wealth is not necessarily shared equally across society. And this is a conversation that we need to be having also because what Mr. Grasso was saying, some companies have access to certain wealth of data, some companies have not. We need to be sure that we level the playing field, and it's not just about redistributing across society, but also redistributing opportunities across firms. So it's definitely something to put in the picture and in the radar. Probably not possible to address in this particular initiative. In this particular initiative, I think what I would like to say is a real focus on collective rights. Frederick mentioned the flexibility of what is happening across Europe. Europe has already done it. We don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time. We can use some of the frameworks that we have been using. Probably we should put more of an emphasis in certain, co-determination is a very specific word that applies to some member states, is not what happens in other member states, but information and consultation rights can also be strengthened to actually foster collective bargaining so that it doesn't just stays at the level of here's your information, we'll thank you for your input, we'll see you tomorrow. We need to have a more meaningful and binding information and consultation approach to this, even more than what the Platform Work Directive does, in order to align some of the things that we've been discussing to some of the legislation that we already have in some member states around past wave of technologies. I mean, in the past, we have banned the use of polygraphs, of truth machines at the workplace. I don't hear anyone saying, "Oh, if only we had allowed polygraphs, we now would have flying cars." This is not the case. There is some innovation that you want to foster. There is some innovation that you want to pursue, and some innovation that is not progress, and we should stop. And so this is something that I think it's important to see in this initiative in Israel. Good innovation to strengthen productivity, to strengthen competitiveness, but also sustainable, the sustainable use of technology.
I think that's excellent, Kira, to ask Frederick to maybe also answer to the question that Phoebe asked. But the question to you especially is also on how can we then strengthen collective bargaining? Because coverage has gone down. I think Sweden and your union is actually one of the few that has been able to gain more members, but overall, union coverage, collective coverage is going down. And so if this is the key in order to also distribute, in order to negotiate, how can this be enforced, and how can it actually be enforced with legal standards made in Europe, or do they need to be happening at the regional, national level?
So again, it was my old employer that was really successful in recruiting. The LO is doing pretty bad there, but we're working on it really hard. I think it's a super hard question, because what you're highlighting is a tension between the need to harmonize our single market on the one hand, and on the other hand, the notion of subsidiarity, that the rulemaking should be made as close to the object that needs to be regulated as possible. And I don't have an answer to that, because another thing that I feel really strongly about in the world that we are in, where our allies turned out to be crooks, is that we need to depend more on European demand for our exports and for our trades and services. So I don't know, honestly, but if you would ask my members, should we prioritize single market over rulemaking at home, they would not say the single market. And the single market has not been very good to some of our unions. The construction industry in particular, where the single market case is being used to exploit workers, bringing down wages. Deaths in that sector have exploded since Lex Laval in 2011, because we can't enforce the rules, because European companies come to Sweden and play by different rules that we can't enforce, and because we're not allowed to. So there is a tension here on the political divide as well, which is skillfully used by the far right. But we need to be clever here, but honestly, I think that if you just look at what workers want and what firms want, having national adaptation is not necessarily a bad thing. So, but I don't know, it's an interesting tension to write a dissertation about or something, I don't know.
Do we have time to, I'm asking the organizers to take one more question from the audience? That would be great. A very short question.
Hi, thanks for this. Really interesting, really surprising discussion. Can we learn anything from Airbus about technological sovereignty? Airbus. It's a success, right? Airbus is a success. It was invented. You know, we have this discourse that, like, oh no, you can't. You were not going to invent Google in Brussels. We did it. We did it. We invented Airbus in Brussels. And what happened in the last 8 years in commercial aviation? 2 Boeing airliners crashed before they fixed the problem. 600 people died. Last month, there was like a little issue, and a bunch of Airbuses were grounded, and then they're like, okay, we fixed it. Right? It's better. It's a better company, and they're better products. What can we learn? What can we learn?
Okay, lucky we have Antonio that is going to answer this question, which is not easy. Let's see.
Happy that you raised this. Thank you for that, because this is exactly what we mean by public-private collaboration. It's bringing together private entities and public actors towards working on the public interest, creating a champion in a specific sector that could challenge the position of established incumbents to basically bring innovation, bring solutions that go also in a wider interest. And Airbus is very much strong on technological sovereignty, because they know that having security, having control of technologies is very much related to the capacity to innovate, dominate these technologies, and ensure prosperity that remains in Europe. So this is a model that we can pursue and we should pursue in the technological sector. Where maybe I must a little bit disagree with something you mentioned is that we do not necessarily need to create a Google in Europe. This is not necessarily a model that we want to pursue, because that's if I can connect to the question on data, that's a model that is extractive, that is rent-seeking, that uses data to create and grow in terms of market share and avoid that other companies can capture market share in the same market. It is not a model that we should pursue in Europe. We should also have a European model of innovation that is a distributed innovation that acknowledges that the majority of the industry in Europe is SME-based, and we can have a third way with respect to colonizing models of the market that comes from the US and let's say, centralistic model of innovation, which is still rent-seeking, that comes from China. We should be an alternative model and that's the way to dominate innovation, not being victim of innovation, and to also ensure quality jobs and workers' rights.
I think this is a great start to let's try to wrap up this discussion. We unfortunately don't have time for yet another question, but we'll hopefully be able to nevertheless make a full round, because I want you to have each a last shorter intervention to say in one sentence, what is the one thing Europe needs to do right so that AI really translates into quality jobs? And I think what's been made clear by the panel already is we don't want to emulate the US or the Asian model. We want to keep our European model. There was even a concrete example right now given, a European success story that has to do with strong institutions, a political idea, also leadership that sticks to European values, is being engineered by European workers, by European researchers. So we're able to do that. So could you all, again, have you the last word, but give me one sentence. What do you think is the one thing that Europe needs to get right so that AI really translates into quality jobs? That is good work for and well-paid work for Europe.
I think European industrial policy is key. We need to build our own European technological stack that includes AI, includes cloud, and different technologies that are all the layers that can ensure more independence and more innovation made in Europe that translate in what we discussed. Better quality jobs, growth that stays in Europe, and hopefully more shared economic prosperity.
Promote competitiveness across the board, and by this I also mean that we'll need skilled people, a fair adoption of any digital tools. But this is a mindset that we should share, employers and workers, in order to be able to actually afford these jobs, have quality jobs, and share the prosperity that we'll eventually be able to create.
It's just one thing in one sentence. Well, I would say then when we produce the legislation needed to address this thing, collective bargaining needs to be included in the whole process of designing this idea. It can't be an afterthought. And seriously take collective rights as a possible solution to this problem, because the world is changing rapidly and we do need rules that are adaptable and changeable to other things than a specific large language model hype that we're currently discussing. Right.
In the world and in Europe, we are talking for the priorities really security, security regarding the war as such, regarding the economic war also we are talking about. I think that this quality job is a question of internal security for Europe. and a kind also of democratic shield. What I mean is, if at the end we have good productivity model, if we have a good market, nobody's in love with the market and single market, but it's so. But if at the end we have 27 government of far right, we will lose. Thank you.
I have two things. First of all, dialogue between the industry, employers, and workers through meaningful collective bargaining, also enlarging scope to include the industry in the picture from the beginning, and seeing democracy at work and democracy at society as strictly connected, something that we have not done for a long time.
You almost stole my closing, because this, I think, is really where this all ends. This is, we've made clear that there is no conflict between quality jobs and competitiveness, and there mustn't be, and in fact we can embrace that probably there is also a huge potential that we can lift in Europe, maybe too little talk about what the single market hasn't delivered and could deliver. I think it's clear that a lowering of the rules is not what at least this panel thinks is the right way to growth, but that at the end of the day, this is all about also our democracies, because our democracies, they rest on this promise of a shared prosperity and of self-governance, of the possibility that citizens can determine the laws that impact them, and this is what we're discussing here, but also workers, and this is nothing else but self-governance, can determine in companies what influences their pay and their working conditions. And if we cannot deliver this shared prosperity, we might have what Estelle has been warning, we might have a complete shift and 27 right-wing governments. So this is much more than just about discussing GDPR rules, although I'll invite everyone that hasn't had a chance to ask their question to the next sessions they will have, the next panels, where we'll go in depth in exactly those two questions, collective bargaining, as well as the rights in the workplace, to the data, to data protection, and how this is relevant to the working conditions. So thank you very much, everyone that's been joining this discussion, for your contribution. It was super interesting. Let's continue this interesting conversation also over lunch. And welcome you back after the lunch to the next in-depth workshops. Thank you.